In all my years watching how markets and institutions behave, and we're talking over 70 years now, I've learned one fundamental truth. When the same warning signs appear 3 times in rapid succession, well, that's not noise, that's a signal. And right now we're watching those signals flash across Washington in a way that should concern every American, regardless of party. Representative Shri Thanedar of Michigan has filed articles of impeachment against President Donald Trump. Now, this isn't about Ukraine. It's not revisiting January 6th. You see, these are 7 new articles rooted in recent executive actions: obstruction of justice, usurpation of Congress's appropriations power, abuse of trade powers, violations of First Amendment rights, and what legal scholars are calling tyranny. From an investor's perspective, this matters not because of politics, but because of what it signals about institutional trust. In capital markets, when leadership distorts the rules that ensure fair oversight, investors adjust expectations, not just for profits, but for long-term national risk. You see, power unchecked isn't efficient, it's expensive. And what we're witnessing is the growing cost of institutional fragility that markets simply cannot hedge against. Now, let me be clear about the reality here. With Republicans holding the majority in both the House and Senate, the odds of these articles succeeding are slim. Representative Thanedar himself backed down from forcing an immediate vote after facing opposition from his own party. But impeachment, you see, isn't always about removal. Sometimes it's about the record. This would mark the 3rd impeachment effort against Trump, an unprecedented constitutional moment. If it proceeds in any form, it reshapes how future leaders calculate risk. If it fails completely, well, it may normalize dangerous precedents. What's particularly telling is what's happened over the past 6 months. We've seen not just one, but multiple impeachment resolutions introduced. Representative Al Green of Texas filed articles in June over unauthorized military strikes against Iran, actions taken without congressional authorization or even proper notification. That's not just a policy disagreement. You see, that's a fundamental breach of the War Powers Clause of the Constitution. When a president launches military action without the constitutionally mandated consent of Congress, we're no longer talking about executive discretion. We're talking about the erosion of separation of powers. And here's where it gets even more concerning. We're now in the longest government shutdown in United States history, 36 days and counting. In corporate terms, this is like watching a board refuse to approve basic operational budgets while the CEO bypasses them entirely. You see, when short-term political tactics override long-term institutional stability, value erodes. Whether in business or in government, decisions that ignore real structural costs tend to compound into broader systemic failure. But what really caught my attention, and should catch yours, is the parallel conversation happening behind closed doors. Sources have reported that discussions about invoking the 25th Amendment have resurfaced among administration officials. Now, the 25th Amendment is a constitutional mechanism that allows the Vice President, with support from a majority of cabinet members, to declare the President unfit to discharge the duties of office. You see, it was created not for politics, but for continuity, for moments when national leadership must remain intact despite crisis. These aren't just theoretical discussions anymore. After January 6, 2021, cabinet members seriously considered this option. The House January 6 committee interviewed multiple high-ranking officials, including National Security Advisor Robert O'Brien, specifically about these cabinet discussions. When insiders begin contingency planning for forced succession, you see, the issue is no longer about disagreement. It's about institutional continuity. And that conversation only happens when waiting brings greater risk than acting. In corporate governance, when board members explore forced succession for a CEO mid-crisis, the company has already lost more than just confidence. It has lost internal cohesion. You see, and the same logic applies here. What's unfolding is historically unique: impeachment proceedings from Congress overlapping with potential executive branch discussions about forcibly replacing a sitting president. That's not volatility. That's what I'd call insolvency of leadership. Now, let me walk you through what these impeachment articles actually allege, because the specifics matter. The first article accuses President Trump of obstruction of justice and violation of due process, failing to faithfully execute the laws. The second addresses usurpation of Congress's appropriations power, essentially spending money without proper congressional authorization. You see, the third article concerns abuse of trade powers and what's described as international aggression. Then there's the violation of First Amendment rights, the fourth article. The fifth creates an unlawful office, likely referring to the Department of Government Efficiency, which was established without congressional approval. The sixth addresses bribery and corruption related to the president's personal finances and business interests. And the seventh, well, that's where the language becomes most stark, tyranny. From a legal standpoint, this language is rare. From an investor's perspective, it signals that confidence in executive restraint has reached a breaking point. You see, when lawmakers use terms like tyranny and threat to American democracy, we're no longer discussing policy disagreements. We're measuring the integrity of the republic itself. Here's the political calculus, and this is important to understand. Representative Raskin of Maryland, a constitutional scholar himself, explained to Representative Thanedar that it's not enough to be right. You need consensus. You need a strategy. That's the pragmatic reality. Even if the allegations have merit, without bipartisan support, impeachment becomes political theater rather than constitutional remedy. And political theater, you see, can actually strengthen what it seeks to weaken. Trump survived 2 previous impeachments with his political capital intact, perhaps even enhanced. That's the tightrope Democrats are walking. Acting too quickly without sufficient support risks legitimizing the very behavior they aim to challenge. But waiting too long, particularly with the 2026 midterms approaching, may mean losing the ability to act at all. In markets, we call that missed opportunity cost. In government, well, it's often the beginning of paralysis. So what happens next? The House may continue to see individual impeachment resolutions introduced, but without Democratic leadership support and with Republicans in control, they'll likely go nowhere procedurally. The real question is whether we're building towards something larger, whether these repeated warnings are creating a documented record that historians and legal scholars will reference for generations. As for the 25th Amendment, that remains an entirely different mechanism. It can transfer power almost immediately, but it requires the vice president's cooperation. You see, without that buy-in, the entire mechanism collapses. And in today's hyper-polarized environment, the political cost of invoking it is massive. Cabinet members will weigh the risk to their reputations and careers, and most will conclude it's not worth acting. Here's the deeper risk I see, and this is important. If constitutional mechanisms like impeachment become routine political weapons rather than last resort safeguards, we set a precedent no system can easily undo. You see, every president would then lead under the shadow of internal ouster, not just public accountability. That's not institutional balance. That's executive instability disguised as oversight. The line between necessary intervention and political ambition must remain razor sharp. Once blurred, it undermines not just this presidency, but the structural trust every presidency relies on. In finance, we call that reputational contagion. In democracy, well, it's how legitimacy unravels. At its core, this is a test of our constitutional architecture. Can institutional guardrails function when they're under real stress? Not in theory, but in practice. You see, I've always said that character is revealed under pressure. The same is true of institutions. What happens next will echo far beyond one presidency. If accountability fails now, we set a precedent that future leaders, regardless of party, will study closely and not for the right reasons. You see, but if this moment yields real proportionate consequences, we might just restore the idea that no individual, not even the president, is above the system. And in the long run, that's the kind of signal markets, citizens, and democracies respond to with renewed faith. Listen, I've lived through a lot of political turmoil in my 94 years. I've seen crises that felt like the end of everything. And I've watched the system bend, crack, but ultimately hold. You see, this moment feels different, not because the threats are new, but because the response mechanisms are being tested in ways they've never been tested before. What we do now will define not just this presidency, but the presidency itself for decades to come. The institutions we inherit aren't ours to break. They're ours to protect and pass on. You see, and if we fail that duty, the cost won't just be political, it'll be generational. So pay attention, stay informed, and remember, in any system, silence is a choice. And sometimes, well, it's the most expensive choice of all. Thank you for your time.